Tallison Teixeira will dominate the heavyweight division. Tallison already has a main event scheduled against Derek Lewis at UFC Nashville. And based upon some of the other performances that we've seen from this guy, a lot of fans are very excited to see what his future success or future potential could be at the heavyweight division. But I'm here to tell you that Teixeira will not only be a top 10 fighter in the heavyweight division, but he may be champion one day. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicyMMA. I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. Also be sure to hit that join button for exclusive channel perks. But anyways, let's get into it. Although Teixeira doesn't have much experience in the UFC thus far, as he only officially has one UFC fight and one contender fight, I think there's a lot to like based on those two fights and even based on some of his pre-UFC fights. As when you look at his lone UFC thus far against Justin Tafa, it was a very quick 35-second TKO finish for Teixeira. And when you talk about a guy in Justin Tafa, although he doesn't necessarily have the best skill, finishing a guy like that in 35 seconds is extremely impressive. And of course, Teixeira was able to do that in his UFC debut. So a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is what makes Teixeira so good? Why does he have an 8-0 record? Why did he make it to the UFC? And why has he had success thus far in the UFC? Well, in my opinion, it comes down to a couple different factors, but the first and main factor is his attributes. Because when you look at Tallison Teixeira out there, it's very clear that this guy is essentially bigger than anybody else in the heavyweight division. He's 6'7" with a ridiculous wingspan, ridiculous power, and he utilizes all those tools very effectively in his fights. When you talk about the heavyweight division more so than any other weight class, guys that have ridiculous intangibles in terms of their height, in terms of their size, their wingspan, their power, tend to be more successful at that weight class. Because when you're talking about guys who are as big as Tallison Teixeira or as big as some other heavyweights in that division, you're talking about guys that are skilled, yes, but not nearly as skilled as guys that are 125 pounds, of course. So the fact that Teixeira does have a lot of natural gifts based upon all those things that I just mentioned is a huge reason for why I think he's been so successful thus far, and it's a huge reason for why I think he's going to quickly climb to the top of the rankings at the heavyweight division. Now, another reason for why I think Teixeira has been so successful thus far is due to his striking ability. Now, obviously in his first UFC fight, it was only 34 seconds and we didn't see much. But in that small sample size and also in his Dana White Contender Series performance, we did see a lot of good things within his striking. Although Teixeira does brawl a little bit, as a lot of these heavyweights with good power do, at the end of the day, we did see an ability to be somewhat technical within those brawls. When you look at his fight against Justin Tafa, he was able to get Tafa alongside the cage and land huge elbows directly on his nose. And of course, he was able to get a finish not too long after that. And in his Contender Series fight against Lopez, he was able to do a great job at staying at a range where he was able to hit his opponents, but his opponents weren't able to hit him. And he was able to land big shots on Lopez, and eventually, once again, in that first round, a minute 57 in, he was able to find that TKO finish on Lopez as well. And that's usually how most of his fights go, even pre-UFC. He does a great job at staying at a range where he can hit his opponents, but his opponents can't hit him. He lands big shots, and eventually in that first round, most of the time, he's able to get those first round finishes. But another reason for why I think Teixeira has been able to be so successful thus far, and why I think he's going to be a top contender at the heavyweight division, is due to his chin. Because when you talk about the heavyweight division, you must have a great chin. Unless you're a fighter like Ciryl Gane who doesn't get hit all that much, most of these guys get hit a decent bit. Even a Tom Aspinall gets hit a decent amount of the time. But when you talk about some of the guys that are the champions of the heavyweight division, or some of the guys that are top contenders at heavyweight, they usually have great chins. Because you can be as talented as you want at the heavyweight division, but it's not going to matter if you're getting hit with a huge overhand right and you're not able to eat it. So I definitely think Teixeira's chin is another reason for why I think he's going to be very successful at heavyweight. But another question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, how do I think Teixeira's fight against Derek Lewis is going to go? Well, in my opinion, I certainly do favor Teixeira pretty heavily. When you talk about a fighter like Derek Lewis, yes, he's always dangerous regardless of what age he's at. But at this point, he's getting up there in age. At this point, he has taken a lot of damage, and of course, all those factors do not match up well when you're talking about him going up against a guy who has a ton of power, a guy who's just coming up in the heavyweight division, is relatively young, and most importantly, is going to be significantly longer than Derek Lewis. When you talk about Derek Lewis's fight against Sergey Pavlovich, Derek Lewis certainly struggled tremendously with the reach of Pavlovich. Pavlovich was able to land on Derek Lewis a ton, where Lewis was coming up short on a lot of his punches. And I think we could see a very similar thing in this fight versus Teixeira. Derek Lewis has a 79-inch reach and Teixeira has an 83-inch reach, a significant advantage for Teixeira. So I think we could see Derek Lewis go into that brawl mode that we see him go into a lot of the time, but it's at a range that favors Teixeira. And if Teixeira is able to land constantly on Derek Lewis and Lewis is consistently coming up short on the shots that he's throwing, I think all that adds up to a very quick finish in the first round for Tallison Teixeira. But of course, with all that being said, Derek Lewis is still very dangerous even if he is 40 years old. He definitely still has a ton of power. Teixeira still certainly needs to be relatively careful of those shots coming back his way, but as I said before, my official prediction for this matchup would be Tallison Teixeira via a first round KO. But assuming Teixeira could be Derek Lewis, he would probably be ranked around number 9 at the heavyweight division, and at that point there are a couple of matchups ahead of him that I would favor Teixeira in. I think a potential matchup between him and Tybura could definitely favor Tallison Teixeira. I think a potential matchup between him and Sergey Spivak could also benefit Tallison Teixeira, and I think Teixeira would win both of those fights based on his power and his youth. When you talk about both Spivak and Tybura, at this point they are both getting a little bit older out there. I think also they haven't looked all that great in their most recent performances, and I think a younger guy like Teixeira, with the attributes that he has, with the power that he has, with the youth that he has, is going to have a lot of success versus some of those guys. But even besides them, I think a fight between Teixeira and Pavlovich down the line could be a very exciting one, and one that I honestly would favor Teixeira in as well. At this point, Pavlovich is still dangerous, of course, but I don't think he's nearly as good as a lot of people thought he was. And if he's able to beat all three of those guys, or even if he's able to beat one of those guys, at that point, maybe you're talking about him moving up into the top level of the heavyweight division. You're talking about the Tom Aspinalls, the Cyril Gans, the Alexander Volkovs, the Curtis Blades, the Jailton Almeidas, and at that point, a lot of those fights are going to be significantly more difficult. They're not fights that Teixeira can just win based upon his youth and based upon his power. They're fights that he's going to need to game plan, but at the end of the day, it is heavyweight. Teixeira does have a lot of power, and who knows, maybe he's able to beat some of those guys, maybe he's able to beat all of those guys, and maybe we're looking at a guy in Tallison Teixeira that's going to be a champion at the heavyweight division one day. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening for Tallison Teixeira. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Tallison can one day become a UFC champion, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.